Good morning, Year 3. It is Monday the 18th of January, and I hope you've had a fantastic weekend. Well done for finding this video on our YouTube channel. We're about to start a week of writing together with a whole new story. So let's get started. The purpose of this writing is to entertain. The audience is anyone who's enthusiastic about dragons, could be an adult or a child, and the form is a narrative, which means we are going to be writing a story across the next couple of weeks. So, we are learning to explore the main parts of the story today. This is because we want to create our own version of this story, and your success criteria are to sort the main parts of the story and to be able to retell the story. And this is the story. It's the story of The Dragon Snatcher by M.P. Robertson. So we're going to start off by listening to the story.
The Dragon Snatcher by M.P. Robertson. Outside, snow lay deep on the ground. George nestled amongst his books. It was a night to be wrapped warmly in the pages of a story. As George was reading, he was disturbed by a commotion from the chicken house. George peered out of his window. Looking up at him was his dragon. He had a worried look in his yellow eye. George threw a blanket around his shoulders and climbed out on the dragon's neck. He clung tightly as they were whisked on the north wind to a land that was neither here nor there. Over lofty peaks they soared until George saw a dark castle that cut through the ice like a shard of flint. The dragon landed silently and hid beneath the drawbridge. George knew it wasn't only the cold that made his dragon shiver. There was something evil within. George entered the castle alone. He came to a courtyard where a soot-black dragon stood guard. Keeping to the shadows, George sneaked past. He found a staircase that wound its way up through the heart of the castle. At the top of the stairs was a heavy wooden door. George heaved it open. He couldn't believe what he found inside. Shelves and shelves of frost-covered eggs. Each was carefully labeled, from the rock gobbler to the horny cave dweller. They were dragon eggs. There was only one empty space left to fill. It was labeled, the lesser spotted red crest, extremely rare. Suddenly, George was startled by a noise on the stairs. Quickly, he hid behind a large egg. A crooked old wizard with a beard of frost entered the room. A shiver ran through George as the room became icy cold. "Only one more to find," the wizard cackled. "Then I will rid the land of these cursed creatures." He stared into an orb of ice and began to mumble strange incantations. In the center of the orb, George could see the mountains surrounding the castle. The wizard searched the mountains, looking into every nook and cranny. On top of the highest peak was a twisted tree. Among its branches was a dragon's nest, and in the nest was a glowing orange egg. "There you are, my little beauty," hissed the wizard. "Soon my egg collection will be complete." The wizard ran down the stairs into the courtyard and mounted the black dragon. George leaned out of the window and whistled for his dragon. As it flew in front of the window, George leapt onto his dragon's back. They followed the black dragon at a distance. Soon George spotted the twisted tree and, oh no, the wizard was crawling onto a branch toward the dragon egg. But George had a plan. Using his blanket as a net, he snatched the egg from the wizard's icy clutches. Then the chase began. A ball of fire came whistling past George's ear and crashed into the mountainside. The black dragon was belching fire at them. George's dragon flitted to and fro, trying to avoid the fireballs, but he misjudged a turn and crashed into the face of a mountain. Luckily, George had a soft landing in the snow. But the egg fell from the blanket, and he watched as it rolled down the mountain and landed at the wizard's feet. "It's mine," said the wizard, holding the egg aloft. But the egg began to glow as if there was a fire inside. It burned hotter and hotter until it was too hot for the wizard to hold. The egg was hatching. The wizard looked on in disbelief as a tiny red dragon emerged from the egg. Then he sank to his knees, picking up pieces of shell. "The last egg," he sobbed. "It's ruined." But the baby dragon was looking at the wizard with love in his eyes, chirruping like a chick. "He thinks you're his mother," said George. "I'm not your mother, you pathetic little creature," said the wizard. But as his cruel glare met the bright yellow eye of the baby dragon, the wizard saw the love that glowed within. The ice that had frozen his heart began to melt. Back at the castle, the wizard's icy spell had been broken, and as the new warmth filled the egg room, a wondrous thing happened. The wizard led the dragon towards the castle. "He'll make a good mother," thought George, and as he flew over the castle, a rainbow of dragons filled the sky. George headed for home, happy that once again dragons would fly free in the land that is neither here nor there.
So that is the story of the dragon Snatcher. That story is going to inspire our writing over the next couple of weeks. Now this may be familiar to you. It's a story mountain. Our job today is to try to understand that story and fit it into the story mountain. Before we start looking at the dragon Snatcher, let's just think about the mountain generally. Most stories start explaining when things happen, who's in the story, the characters, and the setting, where the story is. Then something happens, that's the what, and that can be described as the build-up of the story. Now every story has to have a problem, at least one problem, and that becomes the climax of the story, the most exciting part of the adventure. That problem needs to have a solution and it needs to be fixed, and that's called the resolution. And then we come down this side of the mountain until we have an ending to our story. So let's see how that fits into our dragon Snatcher story. Well, when, who, and where does the story start? If we have a look at one of the opening pictures here, you can see some of the key characters from the beginning. Have a look at when. What would be the answer to that question, looking from that picture? Do you think it's daytime or nighttime? Summer or winter? Well, that's pretty obvious. Then think about who. Who are the characters that you can see in the picture for the beginning of the story? And finally, where? What clues are there as to where this is set? Well, I can see a house and I can see some trees. So they're all contributing to answering that question, where? And those questions are all answered right at the beginning of the story, in the first 2 or 3 pages. Then we have the build-up. What happens? Well, George climbs onto the dragon's back and flies him to a mysterious castle. We don't know what the problem is yet. We just know that George is being taken by the dragon for some reason. Then we discover the problem. So we have an evil character introduced here, that bad wizard, and we discover that he wants to collect and keep all of the dragon eggs. He wants to get rid of all the dragons by keeping the eggs, and if he keeps them cold, then they never hatch out. And he spotted the final egg, and he wants to complete his collection. That's the problem. If he succeeds, then there will be no more dragons, and George has to stop him. So then there's the big battle in which George manages to get hold of the final egg. And this is also an adventurous part of the story, because the problem is George now has the egg and the bad wizard wants it. So they have a big race and a chase. But of course, eventually, good wins out. Now, it's a fairly complicated ending to the story, but basically what happens is, of course, that the egg does hatch out, but the dragon inside shows such love towards the wizard that it melts the wizard's heart, and he then actually becomes friends with the dragons. All the egg collection that he had also warms up and the dragons hatch out. And that's the end of the story. So let's see if we can map out our mountain using some of those pictures from the story. So looking at my pictures along the top here, which one would be the beginning? Yes, it's this one, when George is visited by the dragon. And then we have the build-up, where something happens. George goes for a ride on the dragon. So we'll move this one in next. Then we have the problem, the climax of the story. Yes, here he is. Look, the evil wizard wanting to collect the very last egg. Then we have the resolution, in which George intervenes and manages to get the egg from him. And so in the end of the story, we have a happy ending that all the eggs eventually hatch out because the wizard's heart is melted. So here is your task today. This is the core task. You've got another story mountain here. This time though, instead of having pictures, I'd like you to do some writing, please. Now, don't worry, you haven't got to try to write out the whole story. You don't have to remember the whole story in lots of detail. I would like you in each of these empty boxes to write some notes. I suggest some bullet points answering each question. So when was the story? Who were the characters and where was it set? What happened at the beginning? What was the main problem in the story? What was the solution to that problem? And what was the end of the story? And you do only have to write simple notes in each of those boxes. You don't necessarily even have to write in full sentences. It could just be phrases. But I still want good quality handwriting. I still want you to do your best with your spelling, and I still expect it to be nicely presented and punctuated. Once you've done your complete story mountain, I have an extension here. This is an optional extension for you to use. It says, can you use your story mountain to retell the story in your own words? Add detail to engage the listener. So this will show the success of your story mountain. Can you use your story mountain to then tell the story in your own words? Now, that doesn't mean you read your notes back to your audience. What you do is you read your notes for each box, and then you try to tell your audience in quite a lot of detail that story. If for any of this you need to, just rewind my video back to the storytelling section. You might want to watch the story again to help you remember how it works. Now, if this task is a little bit too challenging for you, I have simplified it for you. Now, this is an optional, and I don't expect everybody to use this, but you do have the option of using these boxes. So on the simplify sheet, you can cut out these notes, and these are some answers to some of the questions, and you can stick those notes onto a different sheet. But I do want you only to use that if you don't feel you can manage the core task yourself. Most of you will use the core task. So that is it for today. That is your challenge. I hope you have a wonderful time writing out your story mountain, and I will see you tomorrow.